Some stories are too terrifying to be fiction. They linger in the corners of our minds, haunting us long after the lights have been turned off and the doors have been locked. These tales are not just figments of imagination, but echoes of something far more sinister. Tonight we delve into the chilling experience of a woman named Sarah, whose life was forever altered by an encounter that defies explanation. It began on a cold, stormy night when the wind howled through the trees and the rain battered against the windows. Sarah was jolted awake by a noise that seemed to come from the very walls of her home. She could feel an oppressive presence, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She lived through a nightmare she could never forget, a series of events that would leave her questioning her own sanity. A story of shadows, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and a feeling of being watched that she could never shake off. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, seemed to signal the presence of something otherworldly. And then there was the figure, a ghostly apparition that appeared in the corner of her eye, something that was never meant to be seen. It was a presence that defied all logic and reason, leaving Sarah to wonder if she was truly alone in her own home. Sarah had just moved into her new apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was home. After a long day of unpacking, she finally settled into bed. That's when it began. At first it was subtle, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, but Sarah lived alone. She sat up, holding her breath, listening. The noise stopped. Maybe it was just the old building settling, she thought. But then she heard it, a whisper, indistinct, but undeniably real. It came from the closet. Her closet door was slightly ajar, revealing only darkness. She felt her pulse quicken. Summoning her courage, she turned on the light. The room looked normal. The shadows that had danced on the walls moments before seemed to retreat into the corners, hiding from the sudden brightness. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The familiar surroundings of her bedroom offered little comfort, as her eyes darted around, searching for any sign of the disturbance that had woken her. The bed, the dresser, the curtains, all appeared untouched, just as she had left them before going to sleep. Yet an uneasy feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of her mind. The closet was empty, or so she thought. She hesitated for a moment, staring into the dark void of the closet. The clothes hung silently, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. She squinted, trying to pierce through the darkness, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the feeling of being watched persisted, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the irrational fear that gripped her, but just as she was about to close the door, she noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible movement caught her eye. Her breath hitched as she leaned in closer, her heart pounding louder with each passing second. Sefek's faint breathing sound. The shadows seemed to shift, and for a brief moment she thought she saw a pair of eyes staring back at her from the darkness. Panic surged through her veins as she stumbled back, her mind racing with possibilities. What was lurking in the closet? And why was it there? A presence. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it, watching her. Cold air wrapped around her like invisible fingers, and then the whisper returned. This time, it was clear. Sarah slammed the closet shut and bolted for the living room. She barely slept that night, and by morning she convinced herself it was just her imagination. That is, until she found the note, SFX rustling paper. It was a scrap of old yellowed paper, just 4 words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "It sees you too." It was a scrap of old yellowed paper, just 4 words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "It sees you too." Over the next few days, Sarah tried to shake the fear. But strange things continued happening. Items moved from where she had left them. Lights flickered, and the whispers, they became more frequent. She tried telling her friends, but no one believed her. They said she was stressed, overworked, but she knew better. Something was in her apartment. Something wanted her gone. Then, one night, she woke up unable to move. Her body felt like it was pinned down by an invisible force, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't even wiggle her fingers. Panic started to set in as she realized she was completely paralyzed. Sleep paralysis, she thought at first. She had heard about it before. A state where the mind is awake, but the body remains asleep. It was supposed to be harmless, just a trick of the brain. But this felt different, more sinister. But then she saw it. Out of the corner of her eye, a movement in the shadows. Her heart raced as she strained to see more clearly, her eyes darting around the room. A dark, shadowy figure at the foot of her bed, standing ominously. It was tall, and its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Its form shifting, twisting in the dim light. The figure seemed to morph and change shape, as if it was made of smoke or shadows. She could feel its eyes on her, watching her every move, even though she couldn't move at all. The terror was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't move. The figure loomed closer and the whispers became deafening. Her vision blurred, and just before everything went black and it spoke one final time, she packed her bags that night and never looked back. She never found out who or what was haunting that apartment. But sometimes ignorance is a blessing. She packed her bags that night and never looked back. She never found out who or what was haunting that apartment. But sometimes ignorance is a blessing. Sarah moved out 2 weeks later. She never found out who or what left that note. But one thing is certain, some things aren't meant to be explained. If you enjoy real-life horror stories, subscribe for more chilling encounters. And remember, sometimes the things we don't see are the ones that see us.